Please.
Okay, thank you, Katya, for the presentation. And first of all, I would like to thank the organizer for inviting me. It's a real and great pleasure for me to speak in this seminar. I see many famous people here. Thank you for your interest in my talk. So my talk, or the topic of my talk, is about determination of the metric tensor from the boundary measurement. Then my talk is devoted to the following inverse problem. I will consider the anisotropic wave equation in a Riemannian manifold. Then we determine the metric tensor from the corresponding partial Dirichlet-Neumann map. So let me start with the outline of my talk. At first, I will give some introduction and I will discuss the well-posedness of the direct problem. Then I will define the Dirichlet-Neumann map and I will state the inverse problem. Second, I will consider some geometrical restriction and I will define a class of metrics in which we can solve our inverse problem. After that, I will construct a special solution to the wave equation by the geometrical optics method. And finally, I will give some idea and claims for the uniqueness or the stability of the inverse problem with partial Dirichlet-Neumann map. So let me start with a precise description of the problem. Let's consider omega be a bounded and connected domain of Rn, n at least equal 2, with a smooth boundary denoted by gamma here. And we assume that omega is equipped with a metric G with a smooth and symmetric coefficient GGK. So we define the Laplace operator by the classical way here. Here, the absolute value of G is the determinant of the metric G, and the G power GGK is the inverse of the matrix GGK. Then we consider the hyperbolic initial boundary value problem for the wave equation in a cylindrical domain Q. Q is 0 capital T times omega, capital T here is fixed. So you solve the equation dt square minus Laplace nu equal 0 in Q. Of course, here we deal with the evolution equation, then we need to add initial data. Here u and the time derivative of u is assumed to be equal to 0. And we assume that u equal f in the lateral surface sigma, which equals 0t times the boundary gamma. It is well known that if you assume the boundary condition f in H110 of sigma, this space is, roughly speaking, is the set of the function which H1 in both variable t and x, and which satisfies some compatibility condition with initial data. So if the boundary condition in this space, then our system S admits unique solution U with this regularity. And moreover, we can prove that by the multiplier method, the normal derivative of the solution, its L2, and its L2 norm can be controlled by the H1 norm of the boundary condition F. Therefore, we may define the Dirichlet-Neumann map as following. Then we consider any boundary condition F, then we have unique solution U to our system S, and then we consider the normal derivative of the solution measured in the lateral surface sigma. Of course, this map is linear, and thanks to this inequality, our map lambda G is a bounded operator from H1 to L2. Then the very famous inverse problem in this setting is whether we can recover the metric G inside the domain omega from the partial Dirichlet-Neumann map lambda G. So the very famous hyperbolic inverse problem with the global data, does the graph of the operator or the map lambda G determine uniquely the metric G? Of course, for the inverse problem, the first question is the uniqueness, which equivalent in our case here to the injectivity of the correspondence G to lambda G. So unique determination, which were known that the unique determination of the metric G from the knowledge of the Dirichlet-Neumann map is hopeless in our case, since the Dirichlet-Neumann map is invariant under gauge transformation. For example, if you consider any diffeomorphism psi from omega into itself, which fixes the boundary, then we can prove that the Dirichlet-Neumann map corresponding to the pullback of the metric G coincide with the Dirichlet-Neumann map corresponding to the metric G. The pullback of the metric G is also a new metric in omega, which is given by this expression. So here we see that there are no uniqueness which manifested by this identity. Then we need to reformulate our inverse problem, and the inverse problem, or the right question of the inverse problem, must be formulated modulo the gauge invariance. And the hyperbolic inverse problem with the global data can be stated as following. Does the Dirichlet-Neumann map determine the metric G up to anisometry, which manifested by this non-uniqueness identity here? Okay, then the uniqueness of the inverse problem up to anisometry goes back to 40 years ago by Bilishev and Kuryliev by using the boundary control method. So the boundary control method releases a unique continuation property for the wave equation, which proved by Tataru, and the control theory. But the boundary control method is not suited to get any explicit stability estimate for this kind of inverse problem. So here we are interested in a method which will provide some stability estimates. So we need to find some function theta such that we have this kind of stability estimate. So if two Dirichlet-Neumann maps are close in appropriate norm, how close are the Riemannian metric up to anisometry? Of course, here we need that theta of 0 equals 0 to guarantee the uniqueness. So this problem, or the problem of establishing stability estimate in determining the metric G in the wave equation, was studied extensively, and the major contributions are given by Stefanov and Ullmann. So in my talk today, I will interest in the case of partial Dirichlet-Neumann map. For example, we assume that we have access only on small portion of the boundary, gamma sharp here. So we can define the local or the partial Dirichlet-Neumann map, lambda sharp G, as following. So for any boundary condition F, we consider the unique solution U of our initial system S, and then we measure only in sigma sharp. This is the partial Dirichlet-Neumann map. And the stability or the uniqueness by the partial Dirichlet-Neumann map is not discussed comprehensively for the hyperbolic equation. So our inverse problem in this setting can be stated as following. Does the partial Dirichlet-Neumann map determine stably the metric G inside omega, of course, up to anisometry? Here, there is a price to pay. So we need to impose many restrictions in the metric G, or the class of the metric G, in which we can solve our inverse problem. Let me give you a very short list of the major contributions in this topic. Of course, there are many works by Bilishev and Bilishev-Kuryliev by using the boundary control method to prove the uniqueness of this kind of problem. Eskin proved the uniqueness, but using another kind of measurement, or the scattering inverse problem. And the first result for the stability is given by Stefanov and Ullmann when the metric G is close enough to the Euclidean one. Here, there are other major contributions in this topic. And the second result for the stability is also given by Stefanov and Ullmann, Holder stability when the metric is close enough to a generic metric. For the uniqueness by the partial Dirichlet-Neumann map, then for the uniqueness we can cite some work by Lassas and Oksanen. Okay. Our inverse problem is related to many other problems. For example, for the boundary rigidity. So an interesting problem in determining the metric G by the knowledge of the length of the Jurisic, joining x and y for any x and y in the boundary. If you consider the geodesical distance corresponding to the metric G as the minimum of the length of any curves joining x and y for any x and y in the boundary, then the very famous boundary rigidity problem can be stated as following. Does the restriction of the geodesical distance in the boundary determine the metric G up to anisometry? Here we can find the same abstraction to the uniqueness, since the geodesical distance is invariant under the pullback of the metric. So the geodesical distance corresponding to the metric G coincide for the pullback of the metric G for any diffeomorphism psi from omega into itself, which fixes the boundary. So this problem is sometimes called the Haudograph problem, which is in geophysics, in order to determine the inner structure of the Earth by measuring the travel times of seismic waves. The second problem, which is related to our inverse problem, is lens rigidity. This problem concerning the recovery of the metric G inside omega from information about its geodesic flow. So let me at first define the scattering relation and the travel time function. So for x in the boundary and xi inner unit vector, we consider the geodesic starting from x in the direction xi, then this geodesic reaches the boundary in other point y and in other direction eta. So the scattering relation is the correspondence xxi to y eta. And the tau plus is the travel time or the arc length of the geodesic starting from x in the direction xi. And the pair tau plus sg is called the lens data. So the very famous lens rigidity problem can be stated as following. Does the lens data determine the metric G up to anisometry? Here we can expect it also the same abstraction to the uniqueness. For example, if you have two metrics with the same lens data, we can prove that G1 and G2 are isometric, provided some assumptions in the metrics G1 and G2. So this is two problems which can be related to our inverse problem with Dirichlet-Neumann map. So let me start with the global strategy of the proof of the uniqueness or the stability in our inverse problem. So at first, we need to prove some orthogonal identity, some integral identity. At first, we need to relate the boundary information which included in the Dirichlet-Neumann map with the metric G inside the domain omega. For the moment, assume that we have two solutions, U1 and U2. U1 is a solution to the wave equation with the metric G1, with the initial data equal at 0 and U1 equal F1. And U2 is a solution to the forward wave equation with the metric G2 and the final data equal at 0 and the boundary condition F2. Here F1 and F2 are given functions. So if you consider one of them and we multiply it by the solution of the second problem, by integration by parts and Green formula, we can prove this identity, the orthogonal identity. Then we can prove this boundary integral, which is the difference between the two Dirichlet-Neumann map applied to F1 multiply F2, can be written as an interior integral in which we can find some functions which can be expressed with the difference between G1 and G2. So D here is C minus 1, C is given by this expression, and S prime GK is the coefficients of symmetric tensor S prime with the coefficients SGK prime can be given by this expression. So this identity is very important because it's release the boundary information with what we hope to identify. Here is G1 minus G2. So by using this orthogonal identity, we can devise our proof in 4 steps. So the first step, we need to prove some relation between the difference between the partial Dirichlet-Neumann map and the global Dirichlet-Neumann map, since in this identity, we have the difference between the global Dirichlet-Neumann map. So in the first step, we need to prove some relation between the partial Dirichlet-Neumann map and the global Dirichlet-Neumann map. This is roughly speaking inequality, which can be proved by some quantitative estimate for the weak unicontinuation for the wave equation by using the F-Gray transform. I will give more details for the proof of this inequality later. In the second step, we need to construct two diffeomorphisms, psi1 and psi2, such that the pullback of the metric G1 or G2 by the diffeomorphism psi1 and psi2 takes this special form. Moreover, the transformed domains of omega by the maps psi1 minus 1 and psi2 minus 1 must be the same. And finally, the diffeomorphism psi, which is given by this expression, fixes the boundary. Then the restriction of the diffeomorphism psi in gamma must be equal to identity. Now we use the new notations. So we will denote by G the transformed or the pulled back metric G, and the transformed domain omega star by omega also. So by abuse of notation, we will conserve the same notation. And using this notation, in the third step, we will construct a family of solutions which depends in large parameter lambda of the forward wave equation and the backward wave equation. So U1 lambda is a solution to the wave equation with the metric G1 and initial data equal to 0, and U2 lambda is a solution to the wave equation with the metric G2 and the final data equal to 0. And in the final step, for the conclusion, if you assume that we have the same partial Dirichlet-Neumann map, for example, for the uniqueness, but we have the same strategy for the stability. So if you have the same Dirichlet-Neumann map for the uniqueness, then by the first step, we have the same global Dirichlet-Neumann map. And by the orthogonal identity, the left-hand side is equal to 0. Then we have this interior integral equal to 0. Then we apply the orthogonal identity to our constructed solution, U1 lambda and U2 lambda. And by using the special form of the solutions, then we can extract some information of the symmetric tensor S, which is the difference between the two metrics, G1 and G2. This will be done by the X-ray transform of the symmetric tensor. So this is the global strategy of the proof. Then we need to execute the 4 steps of the proof. So in order to execute this program, we need to add many restrictions in the metric G. As before, let me prove the first step of our proof. Then we need to prove some relation between the partial Dirichlet-Neumann map and the global Dirichlet-Neumann map. So at first, let's consider the following 2 initial boundary value problem for the wave equation with the 2 metrics G1 and G2. So let's consider V1 a solution to the wave equation with initial data equal to 0 and the boundary condition equal to F. And V2 is a solution to the wave equation with the metric G2, initial data equal to 0, and the boundary condition equal F is the same boundary condition. So if we denote by V1 minus V2, then V satisfies the hyperbolic system, dt square minus Laplacian V equal a third term F. F is the difference between the Laplace operator, Laplace G1 minus Laplace G2, with initial data equal to 0 and the boundary condition equal to 0. So our goal is to find, given gamma sharp, a part of the boundary, then find a function mu such that we have this kind of stability estimate for the Cauchy problem. Here, we estimate the normal derivative of the solution V by the source term F and the normal derivative of the solution only in the part sigma sharp. Of course, mu here is a function with mu0 equal to 0. This inequality in terms of the Dirichlet-Neumann maps can be written as following. So the normal derivative of V is exactly the difference between the global Dirichlet-Neumann map corresponding respectively to the metric G1 and G2 applied to F. And the normal derivative of V in the part sigma sharp is the difference between the partial Dirichlet-Neumann map applied to F. So here we see that there are some relation between the difference between the partial Dirichlet-Neumann map and the global Dirichlet-Neumann map. Of course, it is well known that the kind of this inequality depends in the shape of the part gamma sharp. For example, if gamma sharp is large or all the boundary, then we can prove some Hölder stability here or Lipschitz stability. This assumption in the shape of gamma sharp is needed for the Lopatinsky condition for the hyperbolic Karloman estimate. But in my talk, I will interest in the case when gamma sharp is small, not necessarily large. So here we will apply some method which initially developed by Robiano, which uses the FBI transform to change the problem near the boundary into for which an elliptic estimate for which we can apply the Karloman estimate for the elliptic equation. So the advantage here is that the Lopatinsky condition can be relaxed in the elliptic case. So let me define the FBI transform or the Bergman transform. So the FBI transform for a solution V is some convolution of V with this Gaussian function. Here gamma is large parameter, but Z here is complex number. Z is S minus IT. So here we have two time parameter, S and T, of course, with the variable, with the space variable X. Then is immediately we can see that the FBI transform of the time derivative of the solution V equal I multiply the S derivative of the FBI of the solution V. Then using this remark, we can see that the FBI transform of the wave operator can be transformed to an elliptic operator. Of course, here the variable is S and X, of course. Here the variable is T and X. Then the FBI transform, or the advantage of the FBI transform the wave operator to an elliptic operator. Then, if you consider gamma sharp any arbitrary open set of the boundary, and if you consider O any neighborhood of the boundary, by using the elliptic stability estimate for the Cauchy problem for the elliptic equation, this is the last equality here, then we can estimate the normal derivative of the FBI transform of V by the elliptic Cauchy data. Here, the elliptic Cauchy data is the source term and the normal derivative of the solution in the part sigma sharp. Here, there are no restriction in no geometrical restriction in the part sigma sharp or gamma sharp. Of course, here the norms is in S, in the variable S and X, and T considered in this inequality as a variable parameter. So by using the FBI transform or the definition of the FBI transform, we can immediately estimate the right-hand side in this inequality by the hyperbolic Cauchy data. So the right-hand side in the last inequality, which is the elliptic Cauchy data, can be estimated by the hyperbolic Cauchy data, of course, with a very large parameter exponential gamma. This parameter becomes from the FBI definition, FBI transform definition. Moreover, for S equal to 0, we can prove that the normal derivative of the FBI transform converge to the normal derivative of the solution itself with this decay rate with respect to the large parameter gamma, then can be estimated by 1 over gamma multiply the norm of V in H2. And finally, by using the Cauchy integral formula for the holomorphic function, we can prove this inequality. So the normal derivative of V of the solution can be estimated by this term plus exponential gamma, the hyperbolic Cauchy data. So we write this inequality with, in terms of the difference between the Dirichlet-Neumann map. Then the normal derivative of the solution can be expressed as the difference between the global Dirichlet-Neumann map applied to F, here C over gamma, the norm of V, and capital F is the source term, and this is the difference between the partial Dirichlet-Neumann map. So if you assume that G1 equals G2 near the boundary in the neighborhood O, then this term disappears. And if you assume that, moreover, we have the same partial Dirichlet-Neumann map, then this term disappears. Then we times gamma to infinity, and we obtain that we have the same global Dirichlet-Neumann map. Of course, for the stability, so if we have the partial Dirichlet-Neumann map minus corresponding to G1 minus the Dirichlet-Neumann map corresponding to G2 not at 0, then we can minimize with respect to the large parameter gamma, and we can prove some logarithmic stability between the global Dirichlet-Neumann map and the partial Dirichlet-Neumann map. And this ends the proof of the first step of our proof. So for the third step in the construction of the geometrical optics solutions, we need to take some restriction under metric G. So in the construction by the geometrical optics, we need to solve this nonlinear equation. So we need to find some function psi such that the norm of the gradient of psi equal 1. Of course, the norm here and the gradient with respect to the metric G, with G is G1 or G2. In order to solve globally this nonlinear equation, we need to work in a simple manifold. So a simple manifold, omega G is said to be simple if the boundary is strictly convex in terms of the second fundamental form, and the exponential map is a global diffeomorphism. Of course, the exponential map is already local diffeomorphism, but here we need that the exponential map is a global diffeomorphism. So the advantage to work in this geometry is that the cat locus is empty for any points. So roughly speaking, the cat locus of a point Z is the set of the other points which can be connected to Z by many geodesics coming from Z. So the cat locus set is a fundamental in the analysis of on the manifolds, since the geodesical distance is smooth outside these sets. And finally, if omega is a bounded domain of Rn, and if G is close enough to the Euclidean one, then G is a sample. So this is just one remark in order to construct a special solution to the wave equation. The second remark concerns the construction of the diffeomorphism psi, which satisfy the third properties as above. So if you consider G is a sample metric, then by using the global geometrical, the semi-geodesic coordinates, we can prove that there exists a diffeomorphism psi such that the pullback of the metric G with respect to the diffeomorphism psi satisfy this special form, the semi-geodesical coordinates. Now, if you have two simple metrics, G1 and G2, and if you consider Psi1 and Psi2, the related diffeomorphism to this matrix, G1 and G2, and if you assume that we have the same global Dirichlet-Neumann map, we can prove that the transformed domains of omega with respect to the maps psi1 minus 1 and psi2 minus 1 is the same. In other words, if you denote omega 1 tilde and omega 2 tilde with the transformed domains of omega, then omega 1 tilde equal omega 2 tilde. This provides that we have the same global Dirichlet-Neumann map. So for the stability, there are no reason that we have the same global Dirichlet-Neumann map. And then to guarantee this, this property is not evident without additional information in the matrix or the lens data. So we need to add some conditions in the lens data with respect to the matrix G1 and G2 in order to guarantee this, this property for the constructed diffeomorphism psi1 and psi2. So let me define the lens data with respect to matrix G. So at first we define the geodesic flow as the classical way. So here S gamma is the sphere, the unit sphere bundle, and the geodesic flow is given by gamma x psi t. Gamma is the geodesic starting from x in the direction psi. Gamma dot is the derivative of gamma with respect to t. And t here is in the interval tau minus, tau plus. Tau minus and tau plus is the 2 times when the geodesic starting from x in the direction psi reach the boundary 2 times. So we define the inner and the outer vectors of S omega by this expression. And if we consider xxi in d minus S omega, we denote by gamma xxi the maximal geodesic starting from x in the direction psi. Of course, here tau minus equals 0 because we start from the boundary. And tau plus is the arc length of the geodesic. Then we define the travel time or the arc length of the geodesic by tau plus and the scattering relation by this formula. And the pair composed from tau plus and S and the scattering relation is the lens data. So let me now define the admissible set of metrics. So we fix any vector of Rn, for example, this vector. And we define gamma plus the set of the point of the boundary which satisfy this condition. And we fix any non-empty subset O of the boundary, which is a number of the boundary gamma. So given K and M0 and epsilon, we say that a pair of matrix tensors G1 and G2 is CK admissible if GL is bounded by the constant M0, GL is equal to the Euclidean metric near the boundary and is close enough to the Euclidean one inside omega. This is like smallness condition. And we assume that the lens data corresponding to the metric G1 coincide with the lens data corresponding to the metric G2 for x, for any x in gamma plus in the direction, in the fixed direction En. So this is lens condition. This condition to guarantee that we have the same transformed domains omega by the two diffeomorphisms T1 and T2. So if G satisfy, if the metric G satisfies the smallness condition, then it is simple metric. And the lens data condition, if this condition is satisfied, then the geodesic with respect to the matrix G1 and G2, starting in X and in the direction En, are a priori determined. Okay, then the first condition, the smallness condition, guarantee that the metric G is simple, and the second is needed to construct a global diffeomorphism psi, for which Psi1 and Psi2, for which we have the same transformed domains of omega. Okay, let me give some comments in this kind of simple of admissible metrics. For example, if you consider GL, which take this form in some coordinates, then this matrix G1 and G2 satisfy the lens data condition. Moreover, if you consider G in omega in a bounded and strictly convex domain of R3 with equipped with this metric, then we can prove that the sectional curvature is negative and the metric G is simple. The final comment is that if, or the assumption G is equal to the Euclidean metric near the boundary is physically acceptable, this is the domain has the homogeneous crust and the homogeneous core. So let me state the main result here. If you consider, sorry, we can find some k, epsilon, and 2 parameter alpha, beta, t sufficiently large, such that for a pair of admissible metrics G1 and G2, we can find a diffeomorphism psi from omega into itself, which fixes the boundary, and such that we have this logarithmic stability estimate with respect to the partial Dirichlet-Neumann map. So theta alpha beta is a function with depend 2 parameter alpha beta. Of course, this estimate guarantees the uniqueness since theta of 0 equals 0. Okay, let me now give some idea to the construction of the diffeomorphism C1 and C2. How to construct the coordinate change? At first, if you consider any metric G, Ck in omega, which equal the Euclidean one near the boundary, we can extend G outside the domain omega by setting G equal to the Euclidean one outside omega with respect to the same smallness condition. So if you consider the Hamiltonian system corresponding to the Hamiltonian function here, then by this smallness condition, we have a global solution of this system. Here Z is a fixed parameter in Rn minus 1. And S0 is the initial condition, is fixed such that the metric G equals the Euclidean one outside the ball of radius S0. So we have a global solution, XS and XIS. Of course, the solution depends in the metric G and the parameter Z. So in the new coordinates Y equals Z and S, we have the map psi such that for Y we associate the first component of the solution, X. Of course, X, the solution depends in the metric G and the parameter Z. So by also the smallness condition, we can prove that psi is close to the identity in CK minus 1 topology. Then it is a diffeomorphism. And we can prove that in the new coordinates, G takes the special form, the semi-geodesical coordinates form. Now, if you have two metrics, G1, G2, such that the pair G1 and G2 is admissible metrics, then we consider the related diffeomorphism psi1 and psi2. By using the lens data condition, we can prove that we have this identity. So the transformed domains of omega with respect to the maps C1 minus 1 and C2 minus 1 is the same. And this ends the proof of the second step of our global strategy. Now, by abuse of notation, we will denote we will conserve the same notation. So the transformed matrix will be denoted by G, and the transformed domain omega star will be denoted by omega, and the neighborhood of the boundary, or the transformed neighborhood of the boundary, will be denoted O. So we summarize the property of the new matrix G1 and G2 Then in the new coordinates, the matrix satisfies this property, which coincide near the boundary, and we have this smallness condition, or GL is close to the Euclidean one in CK-2 topology. So the study of the problem of recovering a metric or Riemannian metric from the Dirichlet-Neumann map or the partial Dirichlet-Neumann map, a new problem of integral geometry appears, the geodesic X-ray transform. Let me define the geodesic X-ray transform for two tensors, symmetric two tensor. So the X-ray transform with respect to the metric G of the symmetric tensor S is SGK, is the integral of S along the geodesic starting from X in the direction Xi, which can be expressed by this quantity. So our inverse problem is related to the following tomography inverse problem or linear inverse problem, which is consists to recover the tensor or the symmetric tensor S from the geodesic X-ray transform. So immediately we can prove that the X-ray transform of the symmetric tensor, two tensor, is not injective. So it is easy to see that the X-ray transform for the symmetric gradient of any vector fields V, which equals 0 on the boundary, equals 0. Here the symmetric gradient of V is given by this expression. And then the kernel of this transformation, X-ray transform, is not trivial. Moreover, it is well known that if the metric G is smooth, any symmetric tensor S can be decomposed in two parts. The solenoidal parts, in sense that the co-derivative of this part equals 0, and potential parts, which can be written as the symmetric gradient of one vector field V, which equals 0 on the boundary. So the right question for the injectivity of X-ray transform or the tomography problem can be reformulated as following. Does the X-ray transform recover the solenoidal part of the symmetric tensor S? So this property we'll call the S injectivity of the X-ray transform. There are many works in order to guarantee some conditions in the metric G such that the X-ray transform is S injective. Now, if you assume that omega is a strictly convex bounded domain of Rn, which verify these two conditions, G equals the Euclidean one near the boundary and is close enough inside omega to the Euclidean metric, then the X-ray transform is S injective. And if you define the adjoint map of the X-ray transform XG, we denote by NG the normal operator, which is the adjoint transformation composed with XG. So it is well known that, by Stefanov and Ullmann, that the set of JK simple matrix in omega, which the X-ray transform is S injective, is an open and dense set in the CK topology. Moreover, we can estimate the norm, the L2 norm of the solenoidal part with the H2 norm of the normal operator applied to S. Here we have also some property of the normal operator like H minus 1, it's minus 1 pseudo-differential operator. So let me now move to the third part in order to construct some special solution to the wave equation in both situations. At first, we will construct a solution to the forward wave equation, and after that, we will construct a solution to the backward wave equation, in which we will modify the proof. So if you consider G is a simple metric in omega, we are looking for a solution to the wave equation of this form. So we need to construct some solution U, which equals the principal part and some error term. The error term, lambda here is a large parameter. And the error term is a small in L2 norm with respect to the large parameter lambda. A is the amplitude and the psi is the phase function. So in order to construct a solution in this form, we apply the wave operator in the principal part and we compute the all terms. And we consider the term with respect to the power of lambda. So of course, in order to construct the error term, which will be small in L2 norm, we need to eliminate these two terms which appear some power of lambda. So if we assume that psi satisfies this aconal equation, then the gradient of psi equal 1, then this term disappears. And if we assume that the amplitude A satisfies this transport equation, then this term disappears, then we can construct the error term, which is small with respect to the parameter lambda. So here we need to solve two equations. Then the first is the aconal equation and the second is the transport equation. For the aconal equation, it is enough to consider psi equal the geodesical distance between x and z for a fixed point z outside omega. So by using that, the simplest, that the manifold is simple, then we can prove that this function satisfies this aconal equation. For the transport equation, the second equation, we consider the polar coordinates and we can transform the transport equation to a more simple one with only two parameters, two variables, t and r. R is the arc length of the geodesic. So the solution of this equation, for the solution to this equation, it is enough to consider A equal chi. Chi is any cutoff function, t minus r. G is the metric, and B0 z psi is any arbitrary function which depends probably in the parameter z, the point z, and the angle variable psi. So here, in the case of the simple metric, we can solve both equation, the aconal equation and the transport equation. In order to construct the correction term or the error term, it is enough to consider V a solution to the wave equation with the source term, this source term, initial data equal 0 and V equals 0 on the boundary. So by using the energy estimate, the classical energy estimate, we can prove that the norm of V multiplied by lambda plus the norm of the gradient V is bounded. So here we obtain that the L2 norm of V is small with respect to the large parameter lambda. So here our solutions look like U1 is exponential the phase, psi1 plus t, then psi1 satisfies the aconal equation, and the amplitude takes this form which satisfies the transport equation, and V1 is small with in L2 norm with respect to the parameter lambda. Now for the backward wave equation, we need to modify the construction. We need to modify the construction in order to eliminate some oscillation in the orthogonal identity integral. So if you consider two metrics G1 and G2, we denote S by G2 minus 1 minus G1 minus 1, then S is small if the difference between the two metrics is small in C2 norm. So here we need to construct a solution U2 to the backward wave equation with the metric G2 in this form. Here we added other terms. So this term is needed to eliminate some oscillation in the integral identity. So here psi1 and psi2, A1 and A2 are solutions to the aconal and transport equation relative to the metric GG. And if you apply the hyperbolic operator to the principal part, to this part, then we can prove that this term equal can be bounded by lambda square, the norm of S plus lambda minus 1. Here we see that we have some balances between lambda and the norm of S. So if the norm of S is small, then this term is also small. And by the same energy estimate, we obtain this inequality of the correction term V2. Okay. Now, armed with these two kind of solutions of the forward solution, forward wave equation and backward wave equation, then we take U1, the solution to the forward wave equation. This is the amplitude. U2 is a solution to the backward wave equation. This is the added term. So after computation, we can obtain the orthogonal. We can obtain by the orthogonal identity, and if you assume that, for example, for the uniqueness, you have the same partial Dirichlet-Neumann map, we obtain this estimate. Rho here is given by this expression, is TGK, dg psi1 and dk psi1. T is C multiply the symmetric tensor S. SGK is the difference between our two metrics G2 and G1. So by using the polar coordinates, we obtain this inequality. This is just, we have used the polar coordinates. So the green integral with the function chi is constant. So we can eliminate the integral in chi. The blue integral can be expressed by the X-ray transform of the tensor T. Of course, T is C multiply S, the symmetric tensor S. Then this inequality can be read as following. Then the integral of the X-ray transform of T multiply B0 Z psi can be estimated by this quantity. Now we will fix the choice of the function B0, since B0 is arbitrary function was depend in the variable, in the angle variable psi. So we fix B0 as the X-ray transform of the normal operator applied to T by using some estimate between the norm of S and the norm of T. We can estimate the norm of the normal operator applied to T by this quantity. Now we minimize here with respect to the large parameter lambda, we can find this inequality. Then the norm of the normal operator applied to T can be estimated by epsilon alpha, the norm of the tensor T, power 2 plus alpha. And by interpolation, we can estimate the solenoidal part. Here we can obtain the norm of the solenoidal part of the tensor T in H2 norm can be estimated by epsilon power mu for some constant mu, the norm of T. Now we decompose the tensor T in solenoidal part plus some potential part. Then, thanks to the change of coordinates, T and K equal 0 for any K. Then we can estimate the potential part by the solenoidal part. Then, thanks to this identity, we can estimate this term by this one. Then, by using this inequality, we can estimate the full tensor T by its solenoidal part. But its solenoidal part is estimated by epsilon, the norm of T. Then if you take if you take epsilon small enough, we obtain T equals 0 and then S equals 0. Of course, in the change of coordinates, here S equals 0 is that the pullback of the metric G1 equals the pullback of the metric G2. Then G1 and G2 are isometric, where psi is given by this expression. Okay, thank you for your attention. Of course, for the stability, we have exactly the same strategy for the stability with logarithmic stability. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Murat, for the very interesting talk. Are there any questions or comments, please? Please feel free to unmute yourself. Are there any questions or comments, please?
Okay, this is Rakesh. I'm Murat. So thank you for the interesting talk. I have two sort of very general questions. So if I understand correctly, firstly, your first part of your talk was how to use the FBI transform and the elliptic estimate to estimate the difference in the full Dirichlet Neumann map by the partial. And then the second part was how to obtain stability estimates for the full Dirichlet Neumann map. Am I correct? Is that how I should interpret that?
Yeah, not exactly the strategy, but of course, the global, I have not used the stability of the global Dirichlet Neumann map and the FBI transform, because of course in this identity is not applied to the sorry, because here is roughly speaking there are many other terms in the, we not apply exactly the orthogonal identity. Yeah, because we need to modify this orthogonal identity. We apply it to some cutoff function applied to the solution, and in order to appear the difference between the partial Dirichlet Neumann map. So globally, the strategy is the same, but we need to modify many technical parts of the proof.
Okay. Okay, I'm still not sure about that, but anyway, the second part was, so you assume that your input could vary anywhere on the boundary. It was your measurements which are restricted to the partial boundary. Am I correct? Is that?
Sorry, I don't understand your question.
So your input, your boundary input, the F, could be supported anywhere on the whole boundary. Only the measurements are restriction to the partial boundary. Am I correct?
Yes, yes.
Right. So if you restrict your inputs also to the partial boundary, and your measurements are also on the partial boundary, there are uniqueness results. Am I correct? Is that?
Yeah, for the uniqueness is given by Lassas and Oksanen. But I think for the stability, there are no results. So if you consider F in support in small part of the boundary.
Right.
This is your question?
Right.
So we assume that F just supports in a small part of the boundary, and we measure only in other part of the boundary.
Correct, right. So
for the uniqueness,
about 2-3 years ago, about Lassas and some others obtaining the stability estimate that goes with the Tataru-Robiano uniqueness theorem. I think there are two people who obtained those stability estimates that go with the unique continuation theorem, which is what is critical in the boundary control method. I mean, I may be wrong, but I remember vaguely something about this. Perhaps someone
for
here.
Stability for the inverse problem or for the Cauchy problem?
So, and I think so they were able to obtain a stability estimate using that, the stability estimate that goes with the Tataru-Robiano uniqueness theorem. I may be wrong about this. I'm no expert on this, but I thought that was done like 2 years ago.
I don't know this result, but for the uniqueness, yes, I know the paper with given by Lassas and Oksanen for the uniqueness, but for the stability, I am not sure that there are other results. I don't know.
That's it. Thank you, brother.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions or comments, please?
Katya, may I ask a question?
Please.
Sergey Kabanichin, Novosibirsk. Thank you very much for the interesting results concerning stability. And I would like to ask you about the degree of stability. Usually it's quite natural. The more is the partial domain, the better is the estimate. Are there any connection between the size of partial domain and stability and degree of stability?
Thank you for your question. Of course, for the stability, the function here, for example, for our result, here there are some constant, and the constant, of course, depend in the shape of the omega. But I am not sure that there are some explicit depends of the constant in the shape of omega, because the constant depend in complicated manner in the omega, like for the some interpolation inequality and other arguments, I think. But of course, the function theta here depend, or the constant here depend, of course, in the parameter. In the shape of the domain omega.
I see.
But I don't know in explicit depends in the constant with respect the shape of omega.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions or comments? Any other questions or comments?
One more question. Okay.
Please.
So what are the geometric conditions required for the uniqueness theorem?
Sorry?
So what are the geometric conditions required on the metrics for the uniqueness theorem?
For the uniqueness, there are no restriction. Maybe just simple metric. But without this condition in the lens data. This for the uniqueness, maybe we not need this condition because near the boundary we need just the uniqueness near the boundary, and for the uniqueness I think we cannot need this lens condition. But for the uniqueness, just that G is simple metric, G1 and G2, of course. Maybe, yeah.
For the full data problem, if I remember correctly.
For the full data, for the stability or the uniqueness?
Yeah. What are the geometrical restrictions for that? Are there any?
Sorry,
For the full data problem, are there any geometrical restrictions on the metric?
For stability or the uniqueness?
The uniqueness, sorry, yeah.
No, for the uniqueness, we not need any restriction on the metric. By the boundary control method, right. Maybe we not need any restriction for the uniqueness. Of course, uniqueness up to anisometry.
Right. But for the
stability, this is a result of Stefanov and Ullmann. For the stability with the global Dirichlet-Neumann map, we need some restriction on the metric, like simple metric, or smallness metric with a round generic metric, simple metric.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Are there any other comments or questions? If not, thank you very much, Murat, for the very nice talk. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming. Thank you very much.
Thank you for you. Thank you.